Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and to another video. My name is Talia and today we're going to be talking about how to take notes from a textbook. So as you know, in college it can be super annoying to take notes from a textbook because professors like to assign a lot of reading and it's really dense and boring. But I have 3 tips that have changed the way that I take my notes and have made my life so much easier, and I feel like they can really help you. So if you want to learn more about those tips, then keep watching and stay tuned until the end of the video because I have my number 1 tip that helped me score better grades on my exams. So my first tip for you, and something that I never thought about before when I went to college the first time, but I figured out when I went back to school to take my nursing school pre-reqs, was to look at the key concepts in the back of every chapter. So in most textbooks, you'll find a page like this, where it shows you what every section of the chapter highlights. And it just has specific points that you should really be aware of as you're reading. So what I like to do is look at this page before I even start reading the chapter. This is going to be like your map, and it'll show you what you need to be on the lookout for, and if there's something that's important enough to be highlighted on here, it's probably something that your professor also wants you to learn for an exam. Always read this before you start reading the chapter, and then after you finish reading the chapter, go back to it just to make sure that you covered and understand everything that's highlighted in these key concepts. And just a side note and a little tip, if you really didn't have time to read before class, you can go over these key concepts and it'll just give you an overview of what your professor is probably going to cover that day, so that what they're talking about doesn't sound like complete gibberish and that at least you have some idea of what's going on in class that day. My next tip for reading the textbook is to skim and go over the important concepts only. The way that you can do this is to read the first and last sentence of every paragraph. This is going to help you figure out what information is most important, because in a paragraph and the way that they're written, usually that's where the most important information is revealed. For most classes, this will be enough to get an idea of what each section is talking about without having to read every single line, because that can be really time consuming. For example, for my psychology prerequisite that I had to take for nursing school, in this textbook, there was a lot of fluff and a lot of information that wasn't really as important for me to have to know. So I only went over the first and last sentence of each paragraph, and I felt that that gave me a good overview of what was being talked about in each part of the chapter. And then, as I mentioned in the previous tip, also make sure that you're paying attention to these little definitions on the right, because those are super important, and you'll want to know that if it's important enough to be highlighted here in the sidebar, it's probably important enough to appear on your next exam or quiz. Now, I would use your best judgment to figure out if the class that you're taking is one that you can skim the chapters for. You can probably do this for a humanities class like psychology, sociology, and things like that. But for a class like chemistry, which I'll show you in this textbook, this has a lot of dense information that you'll want to pay attention to. It's really important to probably know everything in this chapter. And I know that can feel overwhelming, and my best advice for that would just be to break up the reading into small chunks and don't let it all pile up and procrastinate and leave it to the end, because it's just going to be so much harder to get through all of that information. So just read as much as you can every day and break it up, because for a class like this, you'll need to know pretty much everything that they're talking about in order to fully understand the entire concept, because chemistry is very concept-based. And finally, that brings us to our last and final tip, which is to always pay attention to the graphs and diagrams within the chapter. First, you're going to want to do a read-through of the chapter using the previous tip by reading the first and last sentence of every paragraph. Then what you're going to want to do is do a second read-through of graphs and diagrams in the chapter. This will help you pinpoint anything that's super important, because usually graphs, tables, and things like that are things that always appear on the test. And before I started taking my nursing school prereqs, I would ignore these, but now they became so important and were things that I always saw later on. So definitely make sure you understand the concepts in diagrams like this, because these things always come up, and by reviewing that, you'll be so much more prepared for your exam. It also helps when you're reviewing or studying for an exam to go back through these tables and diagrams that appear in the chapter and just go over them one more time, even like a couple hours before the exam, like the morning of or something like that. This way you're able to really refresh the concept in your mind and make sure that you know it. So here I wanted to show you guys how I use all of these tips when I actually go to take my own notes. So I start by obviously opening up to the beginning of the chapter, and then I do the first thing, which is the read through of the individual first and last sentences. So let's say that I wanted to start taking notes of this paragraph in particular and these next 2 pages. I would start by making my header and then dividing the page in the line down below. If you guys want to see how I do that, I have another video on my channel that shows you how to take notes on an iPad, so definitely check that out. So as you guys can see in this page of notes, I was able to condense all these pages in the textbook into just one, like not even an entire page of notes, like half a page, because I took a screenshot of the diagrams and the tables in the book, and this made it so much easier to take the notes because I didn't have to go through and individually take notes of every single paragraph. So it just made it a lot more efficient, and this didn't take that long to complete at all. So if you were to do this for the entire chapter, you could get your notes done in no time and really get a good understanding of what it's all about so that you're ready for the exam. Anything in the major paragraphs I included here, and these were just small points in the first and last sentences of each paragraph. Then I added the diagrams, and of course, like, I gave them a star so that when I go back into my notes later on to review, I'm able to know exactly what is the most important thing to look at right before the test. And then here, these highlighted portions are from the textbook's highlighted definitions. These will usually be bolded, and they're really important to include in your notes too. So just keep an eye out for that. And then instead of writing out and copying this entire section right here, I was able to just take this screenshot of this and then copy it right into the textbook this way. And those are all of my best tips for how to take notes from a textbook onto your iPad. I really hope that you guys found this video helpful. If you did find it helpful, consider subscribing because I will be making more videos on the iPad and how to use it for school. And don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Bye!